She said, okay, but it's not appropriate because you haven't taken bath. You've been churning this ocean for how many thousands of years and you're smelly. How could you take the nectar of immortality all dirty and smelly? Right? So you guys should go take a bath. So they said, okay, yes. So they go to take bath and then she goes and gives it to the devas. Right? And of course, then the asuras were kind of cheated. But except for one very smart asura, whose his name was Swarbhanu, but then his name became Rahu. He disguised himself as a deva, and he was waited in line. They say he was waiting in line next to the sun and moon, where they were all getting their share of nectar. And so then he goes, and as he gets one drop of nectar, then the sun and moon, they realize, no, this is really Rahu, this demon. And then they call Vishnu, and you can see Vishnu takes his wheel. Actually, the name of that wheel is Tanaduk, is Sudarshana, right? And decapitates Rahu, right? And so the drop of nectar had already touched his mouth. So he wasn't completely immortal, but his head was kind of immortal. So then he became two beings, Rahu and Ketu, right? The head and the body. And then they were very angry at the sun and moon, who kind of tattled on them. So they're constantly chasing to eat the sun and moon. And so basically what they are is the shadow that makes an eclipse. So an eclipse is when Rahu that shadow passes over the sun or passes over the moon. And actually, unfortunately, there's not that much time, but I mean, there is so much that can be learned from that story. I mean, so many levels of interpretation and meaning. I mean, even up to, understanding the Kala Chakra Tantra, understanding astrology, like so many things are encoded in that symbolic story. But unfortunately, we don't have so much time now. So that was the story. And then it said that some drops of this demon's blood and mixed with the nectar fell to the ground, right? And that was the origin of various kinds of plants. So you can say more of the blood made things like garlic and onions and these kind of pungent kind of substances. And some drops of the nectar fell to the ground, and that made arura, this myrobalan. And actually looking through the different sources, you can find so many different plants that are attributed to drops of nectar falling on the ground. There's stories about, saffron is connected to the story, neem is connected to the story. Many different things. It's quite interesting. Both in Indian and in Tibetan literature, you can find these references. All right, so that's, okay, then there's one more. These are the different poisons, like aconite, datura. Many of these poisonous substances are said to have originated from this time. Okay, so that's the mythological origins of this Amrita within our world. Of course, the idea is that Amrita is that which is undying. So it's unborn. Actually, it's, how can you make something that, how can you make a cause to have no end, right? It's something totally transcendent, right? Which of course is something very much debated in philosophical traditions and so on. But you can see this, the Amrita, this nectar, symbolizes immortality itself, right? And symbolizes spiritual transcendence. So I could probably go for another 4 or 5 hours, even with this presentation I have. So maybe I'll just summarize some of the things that, that I had gone through in my research also. So, in so many of, in Buddhist tradition, there is so many references to Amrita, in the story of Shakyamuni Buddha also. So in that, this Amrita is not only a nectar, a drink of physical immortalities to make you not die, but it's also a metaphor for transcending life and death, for enlightenment itself, right? And in the various Hindu traditions, they will also use similar kinds of things. Then in Sowa Rigpa, right, you can see this Amrita, the nectar of immortality, is very much linked to this idea of longevity, right? Of course, we are interested in not dying because we're all afraid to die. Right? And many people get obsessed by it, right? How many people actually spend their lives trying to run away from death and make themselves artificially younger and in fear of death? But actually, there's a much deeper level of meaning. Of course, on one aspect, there is the extension of life. Like the elder Yutok, is said to live 125 years in his biography. We have other masters like Nagarjuna, who traditionally lived almost 600 years, and there's all these stories of beings that lived far beyond, like almost with an immortal physical lifespan, right? And that's also something in folklore and stories of all traditions around the world, I think. Right, but there's also a deeper thing too. How we can find longevity and how we can transcend life and death. How we can find in our spiritual practice, that which can take us beyond. Yeah, and then of course there's so much more we can say about aging and the process of rejuvenating. And in Sowa Rigpa, so much of, when you look at the chapters on Chulen, on rejuvenation and these things, so much is talking about Dutsi. Right? It's talking on the creation of Amrita, creation of substances, or how to create this timeless aspect to rejuvenate and recharge the body. So back to the four tantras. I told you I searched for the different references about Dutsi. In the diet section, they talk about milk and rainwater. Milk and rainwater having the qualities of nectar. Right? And then some beautiful aspects in the end of the second tantra. On the ethics of a doctor, it talks about some things about medical samaya and medicine Buddha practice. And it says that we should understand medicine to be like a jewel's nectar or offering substances. So we should see all like herbal medicines as nectar, dispelling all diseases and so forth. And then there's a whole practice also in that chapter on the like a Dutsi Mendrip, like transforming your medicine and creating a nectar from it. Very commonly in the third tantra, this was interesting because you can do this search, which on our new database or like knowledge-based website, you can search all of the four tantra texts, which is coming soon. I found it was mentioned in the third tantra for Sawa, hot nature diseases, occasionally for gynecology, for some kidney diseases, quite a lot for white channels and injuries, and for poisoning. But the most common reference, and this when I'm saying reference, they will say, this medicine is like a nectar for this disease, right? So what are they attributing? What medicine qualities are they attributing to nectar? It's especially in Sawa treatment. That was the most commonly seen thing. Which I thought was quite interesting. Which again goes back to this symbolism of the moon and cooling, and the nectar is this kind of water element, life-giving kind of image. Then of course there's two main formulas with the name of nectar in them. The 5 bath nectars and the 3 nectars and so forth. Then just one thing briefly about Chulen, which I thought was great. This is also in the second tantra. It says, when it's also about how to bless the medicines. It's at the one verse in the prayer is, just as there's nectar for the gods, as the Nagas have this jewel on their head, as the rishis or Drungsung have the Chulen, have this rejuvenation elixir. In that way, may this medicine that you're going to take be like really closely abiding or established inside of you. But I really liked this phrase especially because it differentiated that for the gods they have the nectar, and for the Drungsung they have this elixir, right? So for us as more humans, right, what is the way that we can get this longevity and kind of approach the immortality and so forth? It's through the Chulen practice and Chulen substances and so on. So of course, not that we are Drungsung, but we're closer to Drungsung than we are to Devas. Uh-oh, I got a funny look from Dr. Nina.
You will become Johnson very soon, when everything become white.
Yeah, so that was a little bit my research in the within the four tantras. I'll just briefly talk about a couple other things I was looking at. One is this elixir, right, which is like the Chulen. This is another amazing, a theme that you can find. It's all over Tibetan, spiritual tradition and biographies, in so many different aspects, as well as in Indian and also Taoist and many other traditions, is the seeking for this elixir of immortality. So of course, I put Nagarjuna, who's really, you can say like the godfather of, also Indian alchemy and Buddhist alchemy, and also he was really one of these historical beings that was said to have achieved this Amrita in like a physical form. Here's a little bit about him. Of course, there's a lot of debate of whether there was one Nagarjuna or many, so as Dr. Nita said once, let's leave Nagarjuna alone. But, this is traditionally the story is that he lived like 600 years and, and there was an alchemical side, a tantric side, and so forth. And it's interesting also that in the Nyingma tradition, he was the master of Hayagriva. In the 8 Heruka practice given to Padmasambhava, there's again this connection of Hayagriva with a master of alchemy, right? And you can see this Hayagriva practice as well as the Vimalamita's Dutsi Yunten, also they have this connection to this longevity, immortality, and so forth. Then, briefly here, the Sanskrit word is rasayana, which is translated to chulen, or extracting the essence. Now, I don't want to bore you guys too much with the Sanskrit Tibetan translation stuff, but I find this one word, rasa, really fascinating. Because this one Sanskrit word, rasa, actually has